Oleg was only 23 years old, yet he already worked as a sewage truck driver. In this province, such a job was considered decent, as the youth had no other options, even by rural standards. The young man earned little, but he didn't complain. He worked and was grateful for a piece of bread. There were no prospects for career growth in such work, but Oleg was at his limit and didn't wander the streets or drink in alleys with friends, earning an honest living. It didn't matter to him. He had nowhere else to go. In his childhood, Oleg was in an accident that claimed his father's life, and the 7-year-old boy sustained serious injuries and was left disabled. He had hazy memories of that fateful day, as if his memory had cut off, but the disability remained, constantly reminding him of his father. After the death of the head of the family, life became very difficult for Oleg's mother. They were barely surviving. Her son was sick, and she was a pensioner. They needed a lot of money, and the woman worked 3 jobs to be able to provide for the family. She worked as a cleaner day and night, mopped floors, and carried heavy buckets. Years of work in hazardous conditions took a toll. Old age ruined the woman's health, and she began to suffer from radiculitis. Her hands and legs were constantly numb, but she never despaired. She worked until the very end. Oleg remembered his school years well. He was constantly bullied at school, which made him reluctant to attend classes. The male students were always dissatisfied. Classmates laughed at his disability, deliberately chasing him so he couldn't escape far. They hit him with their school bags, took away his textbooks and notebooks. The girls wrinkled their noses whenever they saw him in old clothes. Oleg tried to write on every line of his notebook to save paper, but it only invited more mockery from his peers. The janitor's son constantly received reprimands from teachers, and they humiliated him in front of the whole class if he didn't contribute money to the fund, regularly summoning his mother to school to reprimand her for neglecting her parental duties. The teachers simply couldn't imagine that the woman couldn't afford to buy her child an extra notebook, but that was the reality. It wasn't easy to forget the school bullying. Oleg developed numerous complexes because of the school bullies. After finishing school, he withdrew into himself and stopped socializing with people. He tried to enroll in university but could only get into the paid department, and he had no money. So Oleg gave up his dream of becoming an engineer. He was called up for military service, but due to his health, he failed again. However, he dreamt of serving and repaying his debt to the country. A neighbor, Uncle Vidya, played a significant role in Oleg's life. The man always gave him advice, talked to him about various life topics, and helped him with odd jobs. He advised Oleg to go to driving school, saying, "Who will hire you without education? Nobody's a fool. At least with a driver's license, you can become a driver. Take a chance and go to driving school. You'll earn money afterward, and I'll help you a little without expecting anything in return. We're here to help each other." Oleg listened to Uncle Vidya's words and went to driving school for driving courses. Having a driver's license gave the young man more opportunities in job hunting. Initially, no one wanted to hire him without experience. The only option for Oleg was to work on the sewage truck, pumping waste. Of course, it wasn't his lifelong dream, but work experience wasn't particularly important here. The prospective supervisor looked at the job applicant through his glasses and muttered under his breath, "Why do I need your experience? It's not Formula 1. You'll manage. You'll learn to remove feces. Then you'll be able to handle anything in life." And that was the decision. Oleg became a sewage truck operator and started receiving his modest salary, which he was immensely grateful for. From the beginning, he approached the job with responsibility and diligence. There wasn't much prestige in it, but what could he do? Young women often shied away from Oleg when he was in his work clothes, carrying vacuum pumps. The young man didn't get upset. He understood that his work served a purpose, and there was no such thing as shameful labor. Oleg had a kind heart. He couldn't pass by any elderly woman without helping her. buying the last bunch of parsley so that grandmothers could go home quickly and stay warm. One day, on his way to work, he picked up a small homeless puppy. The little one ran onto the road and feasted on 5 ruble coins. Out of fear, Oleg rushed onto the road and took the child into the cabin. He spent a month nursing Carmilla, feeding her with milk bottles and putting her to sleep in a box. He grew attached to the dog and couldn't leave her behind, so they left together. The stories of their adventures became more cheerful, and each time they embarked on new acts of kindness. The villagers already nicknamed him Kind Oleg, and he didn't mind. He simply did what his heart told him to do. His mother would often scold him, saying, "You spent the last money on parsley for a poor old lady, but what are we going to do with this parsley? We have plenty in our garden. Now you go and sell it." Oleg remained silent, feeling guilty. He didn't know how to explain to his mother that he simply couldn't walk past an unfortunate old lady. He brought that destitute girl home. She'll grow up. She's a big one now. What should he feed it? Meat? No, it needs porridge. Should he give it bones or the whole thing? Oleg was perplexed. "I don't know who you're so kind-hearted like," the young man said. Did he know who he resembled? It was Grandpa Fama. Just like him, he would give his last to strangers, and they shot him, those he had helped. In the years of famine, he shared his last crust of bread with an acquaintance, and the acquaintance hit him on the head and took the remaining bread. There was an example that being excessively kind and trusting was not advisable, but Oleg believed in people. His mother could scold him for hours, talk about prices, but she would be so exhausted after work that she would fall asleep in the hallway. Then she would affectionately pat his shoulder and say, "You're already in space, my son. Tomorrow is work, mind you. Katya brought us in all sorts of things. I don't have the strength to drink from your kind deeds." Oleg obediently went to his room and collapsed onto his bed. In the morning, he went to work exactly on time. Oleg didn't like being late. That was his essence. When Oleg went to sleep, his mother would sit in the living room and talk to herself aloud, saying, "Of course, I have such a kind-hearted one. Who needs such a nephew? Do you think girls like that? They like the rich, the beautiful, the successful. And you, my limping boy, have no money, just one beautiful eye. Kind-hearted to the core. You'll be alone after my death. No one will need you." But Oleg was already fast asleep, dreaming of a large sewage truck sinking beneath a huge iceberg in the ocean. Early in the morning, before dawn, Oleg jumped out of bed, quickly ate scrambled eggs, had 2 sandwiches, and headed to the district center. It took a lot of time to get to the city, but today he had 2 orders, so he couldn't afford to be late. Oleg cheerfully whistled the melody from a coffee commercial. He drove carefully, not speeding. Oleg didn't like to fool around or chase after adrenaline. He simply did his job and enjoyed it. As he turned a corner, the young man saw a half-naked girl on the road. Yes, she was desperately trying to keep warm. Her lips were blue, as were her legs. She rubbed her body with her hands, but it was evident that she was almost numb. When she saw the car, she waved her hands frantically, asking him to stop. Oleg stopped the car and ran towards the girl. The morning butterfly blushed from head to toe and began speaking in a hoarse voice from the cold. "Hey, can you help me? Don't ask what happened, it would take too long to explain, and I'm freezing. Please help." Oleg hesitated as he looked at the girl in her underwear standing near the woods. He didn't hesitate for long, took off his coat and threw it to the girl. Probably a prostitute, he thought, forced to work and then thrown out of a car. The girl gratefully accepted the coat from Oleg's hands. She looked at him questioningly. "Do you have spare pants? I have work overalls, but you'll drown in them." Oleg took out his coveralls from the cabin. The girl eagerly grabbed them from the driver and hurriedly began dressing. Finally, a handsome mechanic stood in front of him, wearing coveralls 3 sizes too big. Oleg laughed, put the beauty in the car, and turned on the heater to warm her up. They drove in silence for the first 5 minutes. Then the young man started asking questions, but the girl preferred to remain silent or said, "Step on the gas, I'm tired of crawling. You drive like a turtle." Eventually, Oleg stopped asking. He drove in silence, occasionally glancing at his companion out of the corner of his eye. When Natasha warmed up and regained her composure, she introduced herself and started a conversation. She didn't go into details, but the conversation turned out quite pleasant. Oleg even felt a connection with Natasha and realized that she wasn't like a night butterfly. In his peripheral vision, he noticed that Natasha had well-groomed hair and a fresh manicure on her nails, and her teeth were white and straight, indicating that she took care of herself. The girl shifted in her seat and asked Oleg to make a call for her as she needed to reach someone. Oleg felt an overwhelming sense of shame because he hadn't topped up his phone balance for months to save money, and now his account was empty. But it was embarrassing to admit, and he reluctantly squeezed out the truth. It seemed to him that Natasha looked at him disdainfully, as if he were the only person in the world without money in his account. Natasha continued, "Can you take me home? It's not far from here, and I won't be able to get there on my own." Oleg knew he would be late for work, and the government's gasoline would be wasted. He hesitated for a long time, but reluctantly agreed. He felt sorry for the girl, even though it was unclear how she ended up practically naked in the woods. Natasha gave him the address, and Oleg turned left onto a forest road. The address led to a luxurious 2-story mansion located in an elite country estate. The girl got out of the car and asked the driver to honk the horn. A tall, gray-haired man rushed out of the house at the sound. Seeing Natasha, he rushed to hug her, shouting, "How did you get here? Did they let you go? Are you injured?" Natasha replied, "Not here. I'll get the gun." Natasha hugged the man and cried with him. Then she wiped away her tears and said, "There's no one here. Calm down. I know who was holding me. I saw them all and even memorized the license plate numbers. They brought me to an abandoned village not far from here. The house where they kept her was old and barely standing. They didn't feed her and only threw a piece of bread at her. Then they locked her in an old bathhouse, placing a basin under the door." Natasha pushed the basin away from the door and jumped out of the bathhouse window, leaving herself in just her underwear. She ran through the woods, reached the highway, and froze. That's when Oleg, driving by in his work vehicle, picked her up and gave her his clothes. The millionaire warmly thanked Oleg for his help and invited him into the house. He offered the young man money, but Oleg refused. He explained that he helped the girl not for personal gain, but out of kindness. The young man's pride resonated with the old entrepreneur, and he realized that Oleg cared for his daughter. After bidding farewell to Natasha and her father, Oleg went to work. He had to explain his lateness for a long time, but he felt good inside knowing he had done a good deed. A week after the incident on the highway, Oleg read in the newspaper that the police had caught the criminals hot on their trail. The front page featured a photograph of Natasha and the perpetrators being led out of the old house with their hands behind their backs. The girl had shown the police the place where she was held captive. The article's headline stated that an unknown young man saved the millionaire's daughter, but his name was not mentioned. Oleg was glad that Natasha didn't reveal his identity to the journalist. He didn't like the attention on him, and the whole town was talking about him. Attention was like death to Oleg. When he returned home from work, Oleg was surprised to see a parked Lexus by the gate. Inside the house, Natalia's father was sitting at the table, drinking tea with pastries, while Oleg's mother, Elena, was bustling around, offering him more. Sergei Anatolievich thanked the young man once again for saving his daughter and offered him a job as their driver. "It's not fitting for a guy like you to be a sewage truck driver," he remarked, suggesting that Oleg quit his job and take a break in their town. "You'll drive Natasha around, and we won't skip on your salary." Oleg gladly agreed. Sergei Anatolievich understood that the young man wouldn't accept money just like that. He kept low-key to avoid drawing unnecessary attention, and for Oleg, attention was like death. Gradually, the young man's life started to improve. He enjoyed working as a driver. Belkin became his loyal assistant, and he was very fond of Natasha. She had initially noticed his attractiveness, so she asked her father to hire him as their driver. With his first paycheck, the young man bought new clothes and looked even better. A perfect match. No one laughed at the limping Oleg anymore. Everyone saw a successful young man in him. If you enjoyed the story, please support me by clicking the thumbs up button. And to stay updated on the release of new interesting stories, click the notification bell when subscribing. Wishing you all the best.